Welcome back, everyone, to the Elderly Confessions channel. At midnight, my mother-in-law called to say that tomorrow morning, she and 5 relatives would arrive to stay at our house for a month. My husband immediately interrupted her. "I'm sorry, this isn't a boarding house where anyone can come and go as they please. My name is Nok Han, I am 34 years old, and I work as an accounting team leader for a medical equipment company. My husband is Min Kwan, 2 years older than me, and he works as a construction site supervisor. We have a 4-year-old daughter, whose nickname at home is Sao. After nearly 10 years of working and pinching every penny, plus a 20-year bank loan, my husband and I finally bought a 3-bedroom apartment in a mid-range complex. That apartment isn't large, but it is something we traded for with countless sleepless nights. It cost me many nights working overtime until 11 p.m., and it cost Kwan days of coming home from the site covered in cement dust only to take on extra side work. Therefore, to me, it is not just an apartment, it is a home, the only place where I feel at peace in this expensive city. That night, it was past 11:30, and I had just put little Sao to sleep. The child had been coughing slightly for a few days, so she was incredibly clingy, wrapping her arms around my neck and refusing to let go. It took nearly an hour for her to fall into a deep sleep. I gently pulled the blanket over her and walked out to the living room. Kwan was still sitting in front of his laptop, with a thick stack of construction documents at his feet. He was reviewing the acceptance report to send to the investor the next morning. Outside, it was drizzling, and the apartment was filled only with the soft hum of the air conditioner and the clacking of the keyboard. I had just sat down next to my husband when his phone rang repeatedly, with the word "Mom" appearing on the screen. I glanced at the clock and frowned slightly. For my mother-in-law to call 3 times in a row near midnight like this certainly wasn't normal. Kwan let out a very faint sigh and pressed answer, conveniently turning on the speakerphone since he saw I was sitting there too. Before he could even speak, the voice of Mrs. Kim Lean rang out from the other end. My mother-in-law's voice was as loud as a market crowd. "Kwan, dear, tomorrow morning, Mom and a few people from the countryside are coming to stay at your place for a month, all right?" I froze at the words, "a month." I thought I misheard, so I looked at Kwan, but his expression had visibly darkened. Mrs. Lean kept speaking very quickly, her tone not asking for an opinion but announcing a decision. "There's Uncle Tu Din, Aunt Wah, then Tu Van and her 2 kids. They're renovating the family shrine back home, so it's way too dusty to stay there. Your house is so spacious, just let them stay for a few days." I clenched my fists instinctively. A few days. 6 people. For a month in our family's 3-bedroom apartment. Before I could even process it all, Mrs. Lean continued. Her tone took on the air of someone organizing everything down to the last detail. "Clear out your office so Uncle Tu can sleep there. The 2 kids can just sleep in the living room. Aunt Wah has a bad back, so make sure to get a slightly softer mattress. Oh, and I'll be coming up early tomorrow. Remember to go to the market and buy some good food, you hear?" Hearing that, the blood rushed to my head. This is the house my husband and I are working our backs off to pay off every month. No one asked if it was convenient for us, no one asked if our child was sick. No one even asked how our small family's life would be turned upside down. They just assumed that a son's house is a place anyone can just move into. Mrs. Lean kept rambling on, saying a 3-bedroom house left empty is a waste, that we're all family and shouldn't be stingy. Right then, Kwan suddenly slammed his phone shut. The sharp click echoing through the quiet room made me jump. He sat up straight, his voice very calm but turned cold. "Sorry, Mom, this isn't a boarding house for anyone to just show up at." The other end of the line went completely silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then Mrs. Lean almost screamed, "What did you say?" Kwan maintained the same tone. "I said my house can't accommodate 6 more people for a month. We have a small child, and we both have to work. They're your own flesh and blood, not beggars off the street. How can you talk like that?" Mrs. Lean shrieked piercingly, "I raised you all this way, and now you're begrudging your mother over a house." I turned to look at my husband. Honestly, I had prepared myself for Kwan to back down, as for many years, he had always been the type to suffer in silence to keep the peace. Every time his family asked for favors, he usually chose to remain silent to avoid arguments. But this time was different. Kwan leaned back in his chair, his eyes tired but very clear. "Being filial doesn't mean dragging a whole group of people here to live and forcing my wife and child to run around like it's a marketplace. If you want to help the relatives, Mom, you can rent a guest house for them, but my house isn't suitable." Min Kwan, your wife put you up to this, didn't she? Mrs. Lean growled. Ever since you married Kay-han, you've become more and more disrespectful. Hearing my name, I bit my lip tightly. But before I could say anything, Kwon replied immediately. No one put me up to this. This is my own decision. Outside, the rain began to fall even harder. On the phone, I could faintly hear the voices of many people talking behind Mrs. Lean. There was even the slurred voice of Uncle Tu Din. This guy is rich now, so he looks down on his relatives, that's all. I saw Kwon's hand clench tightly. He spoke very slowly, each word seemingly suppressed. I'll say this one last time. Don't bring people here on your own accord. If everyone still shows up tomorrow morning, I won't open the door. Having said that, he hung up, and the whole apartment fell into silence. I sat there looking at the man in front of me, feeling both surprised and a sting in my nose. Because for the first time in years as a daughter-in-law, I felt that my husband was truly on the side of me and our child. After Kwon's final words, I thought the call had ended for good. But less than a minute later, his phone rang again. It was still Mrs. Lean. This time she didn't video call, just a regular call, but the ringtone persisted as if trying to pierce through the quietness of our small home. Kwon looked at the screen for a moment, then pressed answer. He didn't put it on speaker anymore, but Mrs. Lean's voice was too loud. I sat next to him and could still hear it clearly. Kwon, dear, I just said that, but I'm old now. I'm not exactly fit enough to get around easily anymore. I just want to come stay with my son for a few days so I don't feel so lonely. In other families, when children are well off, they bring their parents home to care for them. How can you bear to refuse me when I just want to come stay with you for a month? Her voice had changed completely from before. No more bossy commands, just sighs, sniffles, and choked sobs like a mother wounded to the core by her own child. If an outsider heard this, they would surely think Kwon is a truly unfilial son. But I have been a daughter-in-law in this house for 5 years, and I know Ms. Lean very well. She can change her tone so quickly that no one can react in time. When she needs to force her will, she yells. When she needs to evoke pity, she cries. And when neither method works, she pulls out the burden of birth card and drops it on her children like a heavy stone. Kwon wasn't swayed. He just asked a very level-headed question. If you only wanted to come visit me, why did you have to drag along Uncle Tu, Aunt Wah, Sister Van, and the 2 kids? The other end of the line went silent for a beat before Ms. Lean snorted, saying they were just relatives tagging along for the fun of it. Why are you nitpicking every single word like that? I am not nitpicking, I am just trying to clarify, since 6 people staying for a month is no small matter. Whether it's small or big depends on one's heart. Ms. Lean immediately changed her tone, saying if the house is spacious, people will see it as spacious. If one's heart is narrow, even 3 bedrooms can feel like a chicken coop. Daughters-in-law these days are so calculating. Everything is measured in money, and they only care about their own share. That sentence hit me like a slap to the face. I sat still, hands on my knees, trying to keep my expression unchanged. I knew she was saying it on purpose for me to hear. She wanted to provoke me into getting angry so I would intervene. Then she would have an excuse to call me disrespectful and say I'm turning her son against her. Kwon glanced at me, his eyes telling me to let him handle it. He lowered his voice, but every word was clear. Mom, don't drag Han into this. The one saying no is me. Ms. Lean let out a dry laugh. You're quick to defend her, aren't you? Back when you were little, who carried you to the hospital in the middle of the night, who stayed up all night watching your fever, who scrimped on food and clothes to put you through college. Now that you have a wife, a house, and some money, everything I say is wrong. Hearing that, my heart sank a little. Any child, when reminded of the past like that, would find it hard not to soften. Kwon was the same. I saw his shoulders tense slightly, but he did not compromise. I don't deny that you worked hard to raise me, Mom. But your hard work doesn't mean you have the right to bring anyone into my home without asking us. Ms. Lean immediately snapped back. Your house? Do you have to ask your wife for permission for every little thing in your own house? Kwon replied instantly, it's my wife's and my house, not just mine, and certainly not the whole family's. That sentence made my throat tighten. In 5 years of marriage, I've heard so many things about husband's house, in-laws, and how a daughter-in-law should know her place. But this is the first time Kwon has clearly stated to his mother that this house belongs to both of us. On the other end of the line, Ms. Lean was silent for a few seconds. That silence wasn't because she understood. It was as if she was swallowing her anger to switch tactics. Sure enough, A man's slurred voice cut in. Is that you, Quan? Honestly, for a city man to be so narrow-minded is a disgrace to the family. It's just a few dozen square meters, acting like it's a palace. Your aunt and uncle are just asking to stay, not taking the place over. Immediately after, Aunt Hoa's voice came through, bitter and drawn out. Your mother suffered so much to raise you back then. The whole family has always looked out for one another. Now you're doing well, yet you lock the door right in front of your own relatives. It's true what they say, wealth changes friends, and status changes family. I felt a chill down my spine listening to it. It turns out Ms. Lean wasn't calling alone from the start. That whole group was sitting next to her, listening to every word, waiting for a gap to jump in and pressure Quan. This was no longer a request for help. It was an ambush that had been planned all along. Quan realized it too. He turned the speakerphone back on, placed the phone on the table, and said in a low voice, "Let me ask you straight, are you coming to visit, or are you waiting to handle something else?" That question dropped like a heavy stone. The other end of the line went unnaturally quiet. No one said a word, just the buzzing of a fan and someone breathing heavily. A moment later, Ms. Lean shouted, her voice no longer able to feign being pitiful. "Who did you learn this habit of interrogating people like a cop from?" "I said I'm coming to stay, so I'm coming to stay. Are you trying to investigate your own mother?" Quan looked at his phone screen, his eyes darkening. "I just want to hear the truth." "The truth is you're unfilial," Mrs. Lean hissed. "You have a big house, yet you let your mother and relatives go rent a place to sleep. Aren't you afraid of what people will say?" Quan replied very softly but coldly, "I am more afraid of my wife and children losing their peace." That sentence hit Mrs. Lean right where it hurt. She shrieked. "Fine, I'm coming up tomorrow morning just to see if you and your wife dare to lock the door and keep your mother out. I want your neighbors up there to see it clearly too. What kind of person did my son turn into after getting married?" Quan didn't say anything more. He only said, "I'm warning you, if anyone shows up uninvited, I won't open the door." Mrs. Lean gritted her teeth, each word feeling like it was thrown through the phone. "Fine, let's see tomorrow morning just how unfilial you and your wife dare to be." Then she hung up. I sat silently, listening to the rain tapping on the window pane. My heart was no longer just annoyed, but starting to feel a very clear sense of unease. Because a mother who only wants to visit her child wouldn't need to drag a whole crowd along to exert pressure. And a group of relatives who truly only wanted a place to stay wouldn't need to use filial piety like a noose around their descendants' necks. I watched Quan hang up the phone, my heart still feeling heavy. Even though he spoke very decisively, I couldn't help but worry. After all, the person on the other end of the line was his own mother. In Vietnamese families like ours, just one word from a child that displeases their parents is enough for outsiders to easily label them as unfilial. I poured a glass of warm water for Quan, placed it in front of him, and asked softly, "Was that too harsh? After all, your mother is elderly." Quote. Quan didn't drink the water immediately. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. The yellow light cast upon his face made me see the weariness etched into the corners of his eyes. A moment later, he said, "Han, you don't fully understand my mother's nature yet. This matter isn't simply about a few people coming to stay." Quote. I looked at him, waiting in silence, as a sudden chill crept into my heart. Because from Quan's tone, I could tell he wasn't just upset about that last call. He had been suspicious of this for a while. Quan picked up his phone, opened his bank messages, and slid it over for me to see. For months, Mom had been calling for money constantly, sometimes saying it was for the family memorial, sometimes for renovating our grandparents' graves, or that Uncle Two's child needed tuition fees. At first, he still sent it, thinking Mom was back in the village and if the relatives needed help, we should do what we could. I leaned down to look at the screen. Transaction records appeared in quick succession: 5 million, 8 million, 12 million, and once even up to 30 million. Every entry had a very reasonable excuse, easily tugging at one's heartstrings. Sent for the memorial, sent for the graves, sent for Uncle Two's hospital stay. I frowned. Why didn't you tell me about this before? Quan sighed, because I knew you would worry. Plus, at first I thought it was my own money, helping Mom a little was fine, but later on, things started feeling strange. He scrolled down to a 30 million transaction and stopped. This time, Mom said Uncle Two had a minor stroke and had to be hospitalized urgently. Mom cried on the phone, saying if he didn't transfer it immediately, the uncle wouldn't have money for hospital fees. I was startled. Uncle Tu Din in my memory was a man over 50, short and stout, always wearing a tucked-in shirt, talking about morality like a retired official. Every time he visited, he would sit in the middle of the living room, holding a teacup, praising the apartment, but his eyes would dart around every corner of the house. I still remember once he looked at Kwan's small wine cabinet and laughed. City homes are truly different. Money is packed into every brick. At that time, I just thought the comment was a bit tactless. Thinking back now, I suddenly felt a shiver down my spine. Kwan continued. Later, he called an acquaintance in the village and found out Uncle Tu hadn't been hospitalized at all. He took that money to pay off gambling debts. I looked up sharply. Gambling. Kwan nodded, his face darkening. Not just once, Mom knew, but she still hid it from him. Every time he asked for details, his mother would say he didn't trust her. She'd say that living in the city had made him look down on country folk. I set my phone on the table, my heart feeling heavy as if crushed by stone. In the quiet room, the sound of rain against the window glass suddenly grew clearer. Each raindrop fell, steady and cold, as if tapping into the doubts just surfacing within me. Kwan opened up another old message thread. This time it wasn't a bank notification, but a screenshot of a conversation between Mrs. Lean and some relative. I don't know how Kwan got it, but reading the words on the screen made my hands turn cold. Just go up there and stay. Kwan won't dare to kick you out. He cares too much about his reputation. Besides, with Han there, he won't dare to make a scene. I read that line over and over again. My throat tightened. So, in Mrs. Lean's eyes, my patience wasn't something to be valued, but a weakness for her to exploit. She had planned it all along. Just show up at our door, and we wouldn't dare refuse for fear of losing face. I looked at Kwan. How long have you had this? I borrowed Mom's phone the other day to call my aunt and accidentally saw the message pop up. I didn't want to make a big deal of it without proof, but after tonight's call, I'm sure they planned this long ago. I fell silent. The unease I felt earlier had now taken clear shape. This is no longer just about a mother-in-law wanting to live with her son, nor a relative needing a temporary place to stay. It's more like a scheme, a plan to exploit family ties, pride, and the very house we are paying off month by month. Right at that moment, my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. I opened it to find a message written so casually, as if the sender and I were very close. Han, dear, we have guests coming tomorrow. Please help me prepare a room with AC for the 2 kids. If they sleep in the heat, they break out in rashes all over. I stood stunned, and immediately after, a second message appeared. Oh, Auntie's back hurts and she can't sleep on a hard mattress, so see if you have a soft one for her. Also, Uncle always drinks strong tea every morning, so please have a kettle of hot water ready for me. I hadn't even replied yet when the third message arrived. I assume we have a washer and dryer, right? The 2 kids change their clothes so often. I'm really not used to washing by hand. I stared at the screen, feeling both angry and amused. The sender was Tu Van, Kwan's cousin. She had almost never asked about me before. When we met during holidays, she would only give a perfunctory nod, and once even hinted that I was lucky to have married Kwan. Yet now, before even stepping foot into my house, she was sending a list of demands like she was booking a hotel. I handed the phone to Kwan. He finished reading, his jaw tightened, his face darkened, and his eyes turned cold rather than just annoyed. I whispered, they haven't even been given permission yet, but they're already assigning rooms, picking mattresses, and ordering food. Kwan set the phone on the table, his voice so low that my heart tightened just hearing it. They aren't just asking to stay over, Han. He looked up at me, each word falling heavily. They are preparing to take over. Kwan's words made the room feel even heavier. I looked at my husband, suddenly feeling more pity than anger for him. A man who can be so firm in front of his mother certainly doesn't do it because he feels no pain. It's just that some things have been endured for too long. There comes a day when one is forced to choose between blind filial piety and their own home. I met Kwan back when he was a newly graduated engineer, with a low salary and skin always tan from working on construction sites. He wasn't the type to say sweet things, but he lived decently, knew how to plan ahead, and especially loved his mother very much. When we were newly married, I used to think that was a good trait. A man who knows how to be filial to his mother would surely know how to cherish his family too. But later, I realized that the line between being filial and letting one's mother control their life is as thin as a single thread. In front of others, Mrs. Lean is a tactful woman. She speaks softly to neighbors, always smiling kindly and praising her daughter-in-law for being capable. But when we are alone, she is a completely different person. She likes to interfere in everything, from what I cook, what I buy, and where I send my child to school, to how we manage our household spending. She often calls me her city daughter-in-law. It sounds normal at first, but her tone is always laced with sarcasm. City daughters-in-law are clean and civilized, she says, but they are cold as ice when it comes to relatives. Or that office workers like you calculate every penny and don't know the first thing about neighborly affection. Those remarks aren't harsh enough to start an argument right away, but they are enough to make you feel choked with resentment. For the first 3 years of my marriage, I put up with almost everything. I thought she was just an older person accustomed to the old ways. I also didn't want Quan to be stuck between his mother and his wife, feeling conflicted. Once, Mrs. Lean called to say that a distant nephew from the countryside was coming to town for university entrance exams. She asked if he could stay at our house for 2 weeks. Before I could discuss it properly, she brought him to our door that very evening, with 2 huge bags of clothes in his hands. She smiled warmly. "You have that office room. Just let him stay there temporarily. He's very diligent with his studies, he won't be any trouble." 2 weeks later he hadn't left, and a month later he still hadn't left. In the end, he stayed at our house for a full 2 months. Food, electricity, water, and personal items. I covered everything. He also had a habit of staying up late to play games. He would sleep until almost noon, and leave his dirty dishes in the sink. I gave some gentle feedback to Quan. He only sighed. "Let it go. He's about to have his exams. My mother has suffered her whole life, now she's asking for a small favor. Let's just help to keep the peace." Hearing that, I went quiet again. At that time, I still believed that patience would bring peace. But peace never comes from one side constantly backing down. Another time, Mrs. Lean called me, but not Quan. She said a cousin on his side needed to borrow 15 million to rotate capital for Tet sales. She said, "You should transfer the money to her first. We're all family. Helping each other during Tet brings good fortune. Don't make me have to keep asking." I transferred the money. After that, the cousin thanked me once in passing and then vanished. When I texted to ask when she would pay me back, my number was blocked. I talked to Quan. He felt very guilty, but in the end, it was the same old thing. Just think of it as helping mom save face. "I'll make it up to you." He did make it up to me, but what I needed wasn't 15 million. What I needed was for my husband to understand that his wife's honor and kindness shouldn't be used as a revolving fund for his relatives. Things only truly changed one night last year. That day, baby Sal had a high fever of over 40 degrees. The child was convulsing, her lips were blue, and her eyes were unfocused, which terrified me to the point of collapse. Quan was stuck at an outlying construction site because heavy rain had collapsed some scaffolding, so he couldn't return immediately. I called Ms. Lean, my voice nearly sobbing. "Mom, baby Sal has such a high fever. I have to take her to the hospital. Can you come over for a moment? I'm afraid I can't handle it on my own." The other end of the line was very noisy. I could hear dishes clattering, laughter, and party music. Ms. Lean answered nonchalantly. "I'm at a party with the family. Just call a taxi." "Kids getting a fever is normal. Why are you panicking like that?" I stood in the middle of the living room, one arm cradling my burning child. The other hand held the phone, my heart turning cold bit by bit. That night, I wrapped my child in a blanket, carried her down to the lobby, and took a taxi to the emergency room alone. Baby Sal had to be on an IV drip until near dawn. Quan ran straight from the site to the hospital, soaked and deathly pale when he saw her on the bed. The next morning, Ms. Lean didn't ask if her grandchild was better. Her first call was to scold me. "Yesterday was Uncle Ba's grandchild's wedding. Why didn't you transfer the gift money?" I sat there losing face in front of the relatives. I couldn't say a single word. Quan was standing by the hospital bed, hearing every word clearly. For the first time, I saw his face darken in such a terrifying way. He took the phone from my hand and said only one sentence, "Mom, your grandchild was in the hospital last night." The other end was silent for a few seconds, then Ms. Lean still tried to make excuses. Children getting sick is normal, but one should still maintain basic etiquette with relatives. At that very moment, something inside Quan snapped. He didn't make a scene, nor did he make any dramatic declarations. But from that day on, Kwon started to change. He set up a household budget, separating living expenses, mortgage payments, our child's tuition, and support for both our parents. Any money involving relatives had to be justified, capped, and most importantly, discussed with me first. At first, Mrs. Lean reacted quite fiercely. She accused me of controlling my husband and said he'd become a stranger to his mother, but Kwon was no longer soft like before. He only replied, "I can be filial to you, mother, but I cannot be unjust to my wife." Therefore, that midnight call wasn't the first time Mrs. Lean had crossed the line. It was just the drop that finally made the long-filled glass overflow. And this time, Kwon no longer chose to endure it just to keep up a fake sense of harmony. He chose to block it at the door before others, greed, could enter our home. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I had barely slept all night. But I still tried to keep everything in the house running normally. Sao is still young. She shouldn't have to see the confusion on her mother's face. I brushed her teeth, washed her face, tied her hair in pigtails, and prepared her water bottle and milk just like any other day. Kwon also woke up very early. He didn't say much, just quietly made coffee and sat at the dining table checking his phone. I knew he was waiting. Even if you predict things, when they actually happen, your heart still feels as heavy as a stone. Around 7:15, as I had just put the small backpack on Sao's shoulders, the intercom rang. It was the building security calling from the lobby for Mr. Kwon. "There's a group of people down here asking to come up to your apartment. They have a lot of luggage, and an older woman says she is your mother." I turned to look at Kwon. He wasn't surprised at all, just closed his eyes for a second and then opened them. What was bound to happen had finally arrived. Kwon walked over to the doorbell monitor connected to the lobby camera. The image that appeared made me stand frozen. Mrs. Lean stood right in front of the reception desk, wearing a dark purple velvet outfit, a silk scarf around her neck, and carrying a large leather bag. Beside her was Uncle Tu Din in a crumpled striped shirt, his face as red as someone who had been drinking since morning. Hwa was hugging a large bag of blankets, muttering to herself constantly. Tu Van stood behind, holding the hands of two young children. Her eyes darted around the apartment lobby with a look of both curiosity and annoyance. But what stunned me wasn't those 6 people, but the pile of belongings they had brought along. Besides suitcases of clothes, they had a rice cooker, 2 cotton pillows, a carton of instant noodles, bags of dry goods, and even a small sack filled with spice bottles. Seeing that, I wouldn't believe anyone who said they were only staying for a month. That was like moving house, not just stopping by to visit children and grandchildren. I clearly heard Tu Van's voice ringing through the camera speaker. "My younger brother's place acts like a high-end hotel, doesn't it? Do we really need security's permission just to visit?" The security guard looked awkward, yet kept his voice polite. "I'm sorry, but the building's policy is that guests must be confirmed by the owner before I can let them up." Uncle Tu Din scoffed. Talking about policies when visiting a relative's house, what a fuss. Little Sao saw me standing still and looked up to ask, "Mom, are we going to school yet?" I leaned down to pat her head, forcing a smile. "Sit and play with Dad for a moment, Mom needs to check something." Just then, Kwon's phone rang. It was Mrs. Lean. He turned on the speakerphone, and her voice rang out, intentionally very loud, as if she wanted the whole lobby down there to hear. "I'm here, come down and pick me up. Don't let outsiders think you're unfilial, letting your own mother stand at the door without letting her in." Kwon stood before the camera screen, his voice not raised but clear. "I already said no last night. If you came on your own, then you book a hotel yourself." The apartment lobby below suddenly buzzed. I saw a few residents passing by stop to look as Mrs. Lean immediately changed her expression. Just seconds ago she was so aggressive, but now her eyes had reddened, her hand clutched her chest as if she were about to faint. "Good heavens, my own child, I traveled all night to visit and he tells me to go to a hotel. Doesn't that break your heart, everyone?" I clench my fists. That's definitely Mrs. Lean. She knows exactly how to make herself look like a victim in front of a crowd. Uncle Tu Din immediately chimes in. He points directly at the camera, his voice booming. "Kwon, look at my face. Do you remember who fed you guavas and potatoes when you came home as a kid? Now you have a big house, you even turn your mother away at the door. Getting married really made you lose your roots." Hwa pulls the two children to the front, intentionally placing them right in the middle of the lobby. The kids traveled all night and are exhausted. How can you have the heart to leave your nieces and nephews out on the street? Even if adults are angry, you should still have pity on the children. The two little ones are bewildered, unaware of what's happening, only knowing they're being used as shields. Seeing that scene, I feel both angry and heartbroken. Children aren't at fault, but adults are too good at using them to force others to give in. Kwon turns off the screen and turns to me. Take the kids inside first. I look at him. Are you going down? He nods, walks into his office, and picks up a blue folder he had prepared beforehand. He is going down, but not to bring them up. I take the little one into the room, tell him to look at his picture books for a while, then step out. Kwon has already opened the apartment door. He doesn't bring a spare key or a visitor elevator card, just that single folder as he goes down. I'm uneasy, so I stand in front of the camera monitor to watch. A few minutes later, Kwon appears in the lobby. He is wearing a white shirt and dark trousers, his face strangely calm, a complete contrast to the noisy crowd in front of him. Upon seeing her son, Mrs. Lean rushes forward, reaching out to grab his hand. Kwon, I know you don't have the heart to do this. Just take everyone up. Standing here is so embarrassing. Kwon steps back, avoiding her touch. You are the one making everything embarrassing. Mrs. Lean freezes. Van immediately jumps in. Is that any way for you to talk? Your mother is elderly. Don't make me record this and post it to the family group chat. Kwon looked at her coldly. Keep recording, but make sure you record everything from start to finish. Having said that, he placed the folder on the lobby coffee table. Each bank statement was pulled out and neatly arranged in front of Mrs. Lean. Before calling me unfilial, mother, explain this to me. In the last 2 years, I have transferred a total of 286 million to you and our relatives. Where did that money go? The apartment lobby fell completely silent. Mrs. Lean looked at the pile of papers on the table, her expression changing visibly. Uncle Din, who had been acting aggressively, suddenly went quiet and hastily pulled the two children behind him. As for Van, she no longer dared to hold up her phone. Kwon pointed at each transfer line, his voice slow but sharp as a knife. This was for Uncle Din's hospital stay. This was for tomb repairs, this was for the nephew's tuition, and this was for the church construction you mentioned. A total of 286 million. Today, in front of everyone, please clarify what that money was actually used for. Mrs. Lean moved her lips, but could not utter a single word. And at that very moment, I understood that the people who came to my house this morning didn't just bring luggage. They also brought a huge secret that Kwon had begun to uncover. The air in the apartment lobby felt as if all sound had been drained out of it. The people who had been whispering moments ago also fell silent as Kwon spread each statement onto the table. I stood in front of the camera monitor upstairs, seeing each of their faces clearly. Mrs. Lean was pale, her lips pressed tightly together. Uncle Din kept darting his eyes around, while Van lowered her head, clutching her bag strap as if she just wanted to pull everyone away. Quickly, Kwon pointed to a transfer line, his voice calm but icy. Here's the 12 million you said was for repairing grandfather's tomb, but the account receiving the money belongs to Uncle Din. Here's the 30 million you said was for his hospital stay, still Uncle Din's account. And here, the 20 million for the nephew's tuition was also transferred to the same place. Explain it, mother. Mrs. Lean looked around, and seeing more and more eyes fixed on her, she immediately became enraged. She slammed her hand down on the table, her voice shrill. Are you investigating your own mother like a criminal? I am your mother, Kwon. Don't you feel ashamed of doing that? Kwon gave a faint smile. It wasn't much, but through the screen, I could clearly see the disappointment in his eyes. If you have nothing to hide, mother, what are you afraid of? That remark left Mrs. Lean speechless. Uncle Din immediately stepped forward, intending to grab the bank statements, but Kwon blocked his hand. Don't touch them, these documents are mine. Uncle Din rolled his eyes. Don't be so insolent. The elders are talking, yet you act as if you're in a courtroom. Kwon looked him straight in the eye. If you all keep lying, you might actually end up in a real courtroom. As soon as he said that, Uncle Din's expression changed noticeably. He no longer looked aggressive and took half a step back. Van hurriedly pulled Mrs. Lean's arm and whispered something in her ear. I couldn't hear it all, only saw her lips moving quickly, her face full of panic. Just then, a security guard walked up to Kwon. He glanced at the group, then lowered his voice. Mr. Kwan, can I have a word with you? Down in the parking lot, two strangers keep asking about Mr. Din, saying they saw him come up here. Kwan paused for a moment. Upon hearing that, Mrs. Lean turned pale, and Uncle Din immediately turned to look out the lobby's large glass doors. That gesture was too telling. Someone with nothing to hide wouldn't react like that. Kwan asked the guard, "What kind of car are they in?" "Yes, a black car has been parked outside the gate since early this morning. We checked the cameras earlier and saw that car tailing the taxi your family came in." Hearing this, my heart started pounding. So, not only did that group show up at my house uninvited, but they were also being followed. Tu Van started to lose her composure. She yanked Mrs. Lean's arm hard. "Auntie, let's go up quickly. Staying here any longer isn't good." Kwan heard that clearly. He turned to look at Tu Van, his gaze sharp as a knife. "What do you mean, not good?" Tu Van quickly brushed it off. "It's nothing, the two kids are tired, we can't just stand here forever." But by now, no one believed her anymore. Mrs. Wah clutched the bag of blankets, her face deathly pale. The two children were scared by the tense atmosphere, standing huddled together, not daring to speak. Kwan slowly picked up a paper from the file and held it up in front of Ms. Lean. "Tell me the truth, Mom, what happened back home?" Ms. Lean bit her lip, her eyes turning red. "Nothing happened, don't listen to outsiders talking nonsense." Kwan slammed the paper onto the table, the sharp sound making the whole lobby jump. "If nothing happened, why was Uncle Tu's house back home sealed by the bank 3 days ago?" I stood upstairs, feeling a chill go through my whole body. The house had been seized by the bank, such a big deal, yet last night Ms. Lean had said so casually that they were just visiting because the family ancestral house was being renovated. Ms. Lean staggered back a step, while Uncle Tu Din shouted out, "Who told you? Which busybody told you that?" Kwan looked at him. "So it is true." Uncle Tu realized he had slipped up. His face turned bright red, but he couldn't say another word. Ms. Lean hurriedly clutched her chest, ready to play the weak card again. "Kwan, I didn't want to tell you because I was afraid you'd worry. I just wanted to stay here for a few days. We'll deal with things back home later, let us stay temporarily." Kwan gritted his teeth. "Or did you drag everyone up here to hide from debt?" The apartment lobby immediately started buzzing. I saw some people standing near the front desk look at each other, their eyes filled with surprise and caution. Kwan took out his phone, opened a message thread, and held it up. "Last night, after you called, I asked Fuck back home to look into it for me. You know he works at the land registration office. Uncle Tu mortgaged the land deeds to the bank 4 months ago, not just his own house, but he also dragged 3 other relative households into taking out loans." Uncle Tu stammered, I just wanted to do business, who would have thought?" Kwan cut him off. "Do business? What kind?" Quote, "Selling biosupplements with American technology? Diamond investment packages, the more you pay the higher the commission, guaranteed 15% interest per month." "You call that doing business?" Tu Van heard this and burst into tears. "Uncle, please, can you stop talking? We are victims too." Kwan turned to her. "Victims who were messaging my wife last night demanding an air-conditioned room, soft mattresses, and hot water. The victims who dragged a rice cooker, a box of noodles, and a sack of spices to my house this morning. You didn't intend to stay for a few days. You intended to latch onto my home until this is all over." Every one of Kwan's words seemed to strip away the pathetic facade they had tried to build. Mrs. Lean burst into tears, but this time it didn't sound like a hurt mother. It was the cry of someone exposed in front of a crowd. "I have no other choice, Kwan. The house back home is sealed off, and all the money is gone. Your uncle said we should just come here temporarily, wait until he can raise some capital, then we'll go back. I was afraid you wouldn't agree, so I had to lie." Kwan coldly continued, "You use filial piety to pressure me, use children to pressure my wife, and use tears to drag a pile of trouble to my doorstep." Mrs. Lean looked up, her face smeared with tears. "I am your mother. If you don't save me, then who will?" Kwan was silent for a few seconds. When he spoke again, his voice was raspy but very firm. "I can help you deal with the consequences properly, but I will not let you turn my wife and my home into a hideout for debt." I looked through the screen, my heart pounding. Because I knew from that moment, everything was no longer just a family argument. Behind the 6 people dragging suitcases to my house was a massive debt, a scam ring, and a deep pit they were trying to drag my small family into. Everything in the lobby was already chaotic enough, but I didn't expect that it was only the first wave. Just as Quan finished his sentence, the apartment's large glass door suddenly opened. Two men in black walked in, moving quickly, their eyes scanning the area before stopping right at Uncle Din. One was tall and thin with a gaunt face and a long scar on his neck. The other was shorter but very broad-shouldered, holding a crumpled stack of papers. They didn't look like visitors or people who had the wrong address. You only had to look at how the security guard immediately stood at attention. I knew something bad was coming. The tall, thin man pointed straight at Uncle Din, his voice cold. "Mr. Din, how much longer do you plan on hiding?" Uncle Tu intended to step back, his face, just moments ago flushed from shouting at Quan, suddenly turned ashen gray. Aunt Hua let out a soft cry, while Tu Van immediately pulled the two children to hide behind the sofa in the lobby. Mrs. Lean stood frozen, her eyes wide, lips trembling, but she couldn't utter a single word. The apartment security guard hurried over to stand between the two sides. "Gentlemen, stay calm. This is a residential area. If there's an issue, talk outside, don't cause a scene in the lobby." The broad-shouldered man sneered and held up the stack of papers in his hand. "We don't want to cause trouble either, but this man signed for a 600 million loan, promised to pay yesterday, then dragged his family to hide here this morning. We are just here to collect from the right person." The whole lobby erupted in murmurs. I was standing upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. 600 million, not just a few tens of millions like the previous amounts Quan sent to his mother. This is a debt heavy enough to collapse the life of any ordinary family. Quan stood still, his gaze shifting from Uncle Tu to his mother. He didn't ask immediately, but that silence was more terrifying than any interrogation. Uncle Tu tried to regain his composure, straining his neck to argue back. "What you say must have proof. When did I borrow it? Don't think I'm easygoing and try to frame me." The tall, thin man didn't say much. He pulled a photocopy from the stack and threw it directly onto the coffee table, right next to Quan's bank statements. "Here's your signature, here's your fingerprint, and here's the photo taken when you received the money. Do you want me to pull up the security footage too?" Uncle Tu was speechless. Aunt Hua lunged to pick up the paper, glanced at it, then slumped into a chair, her face deathly pale and her hands trembling violently. You borrowed again? You said you only owed the bank." Aunt Hoa's words made everything even clearer. It turns out this predatory loan wasn't known to everyone. They had already lost money to a pyramid scheme and had their house sealed by the bank. Yet, Uncle Tu still borrowed from outside to keep covering losses, holding on to the delusional hope that more capital would bring everything back. The broad-shouldered man growled, "Do you lot think escaping to the city is the end of it? People's money doesn't grow on trees. If you don't pay today, you must provide a clear written agreement." Tu Van burst into tears, clutching her two children to her chest. "Stop talking, you're scaring my children." But that very sound of crying startled little Sao in the inner room. She ran out of the bedroom, standing behind me, her eyes dazed as she stared at the camera screen. "Mom, why are there people shouting downstairs?" I quickly pulled her into my arms, but she had already seen her grandmother, her aunt and uncle, and strangers arguing in the lobby. She was terrified and burst into tears. The sound of her crying felt like a needle stabbing straight into my heart. I immediately called Quan. "Honey, Sao saw everything, she's so scared." Quan heard our daughter crying over the phone, and his expression shifted instantly. He looked up at the camera, as if looking directly at me and our daughter. Then he turned to the group in front of him, his voice dropping to a frightening level. "Whoever owes the debt should pay it. Don't bring these creditors to my wife and child's doorstep." The tall, thin man sneered. "We didn't want to come here either. But your mother told us to come and meet you. She said her son has a house and a good job, he has plenty of money." Quan snapped his head toward Ms. Lean. "Did you say that, Mom?" Ms. Lean staggered as if she were about to collapse. She grabbed the back of a chair and suddenly fell to her knees in the middle of the lobby. That action left everyone stunned. Even the two men in black paused. Ms. Lean sobbed, her hands clasped in front of her chest. "Quan, please, save me just this once. I don't want to end up on the street. I didn't know it would turn out like this. I only thought about investing for interest. Who knew they would cheat me?" Her voice broke into pieces. It sounded so desperate that if I hadn't witnessed it from the start, I might have softened my heart, but Quan did not step forward to help her up. He stood still, his hands hanging at his sides, his face pained yet cold and rigid. Get up, Mom. Kneeling here won't make the dead disappear. Quote. Ms. Lean looked up, tears streaming down her face. You are my son. If you don't save me, who else can I turn to? At that moment, the broad-shouldered man let out a scoff. His laughter echoed through the lobby, bitter and grating. You talk as if you're completely innocent, don't you? You didn't just invest. You're the one who lured others into putting in their money. You took your commission first, and now you're crying like a total victim? My entire body went cold. Quan stood frozen, his eyes fixed directly on his mother. You are the one who dragged the whole family into that trap. Mrs. Lean opened her mouth but couldn't speak. The pitiful look on her face suddenly cracked, revealing the panic of someone exposed at their most vulnerable point. The man continued. She bragged that her son worked in the city, that he had a house and a wife who's an accountant, promising whoever followed her to invest would never lose out. People trusted her enough to mortgage their deeds, take bank loans, and even borrow from others. Now that it's collapsed, she plans to run here to hide with her son. I hugged Cao tight, my body icy cold. Before me stood a woman who always preached morality, always using filial piety to pressure her children. It turns out she wasn't just a victim of greed. She was the one holding the torch, burning down other people's homes. And when the fire spread, she came knocking on her son's door to hide. The truth just laid bare left the entire apartment lobby in a suffocating silence. The two men in black were still standing there. The security guard watched both sides nervously, and the neighbors who had stopped to watch were now too afraid to speak aloud. Quan stooped to pick up the stack of statements on the floor, stacking each sheet neatly as if trying to keep his hands from shaking. He looked at Mrs. Lean and then at the man, his voice hoarse. Everyone leave here right now. As for the debts, whoever signed for them must resolve them themselves. I will not let my wife and child be dragged into this. Hearing that, Mrs. Lean rushed over to cling tightly to Quan's legs. That sight made my heart ache, not for her, but for my husband. A man pushed by his own mother to stand in the middle of a crowd, feeling hurt, humiliated, and helpless all at once. Quan, please, let me stay at your place for a few days. I have nowhere else left to go. I'm old, how can you bear to let me sleep on the street? Quan bent down, trying to pry her hands off. You can rent a guest house, I'll book you a room for tonight. But you cannot bring these troubles into my home. Uncle Tu Din standing nearby suddenly sneered. Perhaps seeing Quan still held some affection for his mother, he thought he could pressure him further. He straightened his collar, speaking in a tone that was half threatening, half persuasive. Why are you being so uptight? Just help us get through this. Selling this house will settle it. Houses can be bought again, but if you lose your family, you'll regret it forever. Standing upstairs listening through the camera monitor, a chill ran down my spine. Sell this house. That sentence was like a blade slashing through the 10 years of effort my husband and I put in. This apartment didn't fall from the sky. It was money I saved month by month, year-end bonuses I didn't dare spend, and the times Quan worked on distant sites until midnight. Yet, in Uncle Tu's mouth, it was as light as a pawned item, just sell it and be done. Down in the hall, Quan jumped to his feet. It was the first time I had ever seen him so out of control. He grabbed Uncle Tu Din by the collar, his eyes bloodshot. What did you just say? Uncle Tu was jerked forward, his face paling, but he still tried to stand his ground. Did I say something wrong? You are a nephew in the family. You have the means, so you must shoulder this. Your house has 3 bedrooms. Selling it to buy a smaller one is fine. Saving the whole family is what matters. Quan gritted his teeth. By what right do you tell me to sell my and my wife's home? Tu Van saw the situation was getting tense and hurried to pull Uncle Tu back, but she ended up blurting out something that blew everything wide open. Stop it, Uncle, don't make a scene. Aunt Lean already said, this house is paternal property sooner or later. We just need to convince Uncle Quan to sign a bank loan to cover the upfront costs. Quote. The space seemed to freeze. Even Aunt Lean whipped her head around to look at Tu Van. That look wasn't out of reproach for saying the wrong thing, but panic because she had let the secret slip. I hugged baby Cao tighter. She didn't understand anything and just buried her face in my chest, but I understood perfectly well. They didn't come up here to ask for a place to stay. Before stepping into this apartment, they had already plotted to use our home as a lifeboat, planning to overstay, pressure us with tears, public opinion, and relatives, then force Kwon to take out a bank loan or sell the house to pay their debts. Kwon let go of Uncle Two's collar and turned to look at his mother. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from a disappointment that had reached its limit. "So you plan to sell my house?" Mrs. Lean wiped her tears, but the fragile look from a moment ago had vanished. Her face hardened, and her gaze turned cold and sharp. When the pitiable mask was no longer useful, she began to reveal her true nature. "I didn't plan to sell it. I only told you to find money to save our relatives. You can always buy another house later, but if our relatives die or lose everything, how can we ever get them back?" Kwon let out a laugh, a dry, painful laugh that made me choke just hearing it. "What about my wife and child? Have you ever thought about where Han and baby Sal would live if I sold the house?" Mrs. Lean looked straight at her son and said dismissively that renting a place for a few years wouldn't kill anyone. "Back in my day, I lived in a thatched hut and still managed to raise you." I was struck dumb. There are words that require no shouting or screaming, yet are enough to hurt the listener to the bone. To Mrs. Lean, our home was worth nothing compared to the face of our relatives. The safety of baby Sal was worth nothing compared to debts caused by greed. My hard work was worth nothing because, in her eyes, I am just a daughter-in-law, an outsider. Kwon stood still for a long time, then slowly took a step back, as if trying to break free from his own mother's shadow. He pointed to the door, his voice low but every word clear. "From today on, don't call this your home anymore, and don't call this apartment family property. This is my home, Han's home, and baby Sal's home. If anyone brings up selling the house or using it for a loan again, I will call the police immediately." Mrs. Lean was stunned. Uncle Tu tried to speak, but Kwon turned to look at him, his gaze so cold that he fell silent instantly. "Everyone get out of here within 10 minutes. If you keep causing trouble in front of the apartment, I will call the local police to handle this. As for the debts, I will say this one last time. Do not use my family as collateral for your own mistakes." I looked through the screen, tears silently falling. Not because I was afraid anymore, but because I knew that from that moment, Min Kwon had truly stepped up to protect our home. And that door, once closed against greed, would not be easily opened again by a few fake tears. I thought everything had come to a temporary stop. After Kwon made his statement clearly in the lobby, security escorted Ms. Lean's group to the gate area to avoid disturbing the residents. The two men in black also left after leaving a phone number and setting a private meeting with the fourth uncle. I thought that at least for that day, everyone was tired enough not to do anything else extreme. But I had underestimated Van. That evening after the baby fell asleep, I was tidying up the living room when my phone rang continuously. At first, it was a message from a colleague, then a missed call from an old neighbor. Then a high school friend I hadn't been in touch with for years sent me a link with the question, "Han, is this your family?" I opened it, and my hands immediately went cold. It was a Facebook live stream by Van. She was standing right in front of my apartment gate, filming while sobbing like someone witnessing a tragic fate. In the frame, Ms. Lean sat on the tiled floor, clutching her bags, her hair disheveled and her face drenched in tears. Beside her, the sister-in-law held the two children, all three intentionally bowing their heads, looking incredibly miserable. Van cried while speaking to the camera, "Everyone, look, this is the scene of a mother who traveled all night to visit her son, only to be kicked out by him and his wife. A spacious 3-bedroom apartment with the AC running, yet his elderly mother has to sit out here at the gate." I listened and my blood began to boil. She didn't film the part where the fourth son was sought by debt collectors, didn't film Kwon showing the 286 million statement, nor did she film them discussing how to force my husband to sell the house. She only chose the perfect angle of Mrs. Lean sitting on the ground, the perfect sobbing voice, and the perfect images of two tired children to manipulate viewers' sympathy. Underneath the video, the comments increased by the minute. "Children these days are so ungrateful. Getting a wife means forgetting their mother. With a house that big, they can't even house their mother. How immoral. The daughter-in-law must be fearsome for the husband to dare kick his mother out." I read each line, my hands trembling. People who don't know the full story judge so quickly, so boldly. as if seeing a mother cry is enough to convict an entire family. Kwon walked out of his office, saw my pale face, and asked, "What's wrong?" I handed him the phone. He watched the entire video from start to finish without saying a word. His silence worried me more than if he had been angry. He just scrolled down to read the comments, his gaze growing colder by the second. A moment later, his phone began to ring. The caller was a relative from his father's side. Kwon turned on the speakerphone. "Kwon, I never expected you to behave like this. Whatever your mother did wrong, she is still your mother. You left her sitting out on the street. What will the world think of such a disgrace?" Kwon asked calmly. "Have you seen the full story yet?" The other end paused, then spoke. "Family matters should be kept private. Don't let outsiders laugh at us." Kwon smiled faintly. "I am not the one who put our family business online." He hung up, and immediately after, several more calls came in. Some scolded, some advised, and some hinted that I was an ignorant daughter-in-law. I was so angry I could choke, but Kwon still didn't explain himself to each person. He simply sat at the desk, opened his laptop, and called a friend named Hi. "Hi, help me extract all the security footage from the apartment lobby this morning, especially the part where the creditors arrived, where the fourth son talked about selling the house, and where my mother said it wouldn't kill my wife and kids to go rent a place for a few years." I looked up at him. Kwon continued, his voice very clear. "I'm not editing anything. I need the full timeline. Anyone who wants to see my mother cry should also see what she did beforehand." Quote. That night, Kwon barely slept. He and Hai reconstructed the entire event chronologically, starting from last night's call. Two vans messages demanding rooms, the group dragging luggage to the lobby, and the bank transfer statements. The creditors showing up and Uncle Two blurting out about selling the house. Two vans slipping up about the bank loan, and finally, Mrs. Lean's remark. "Renting a place for a few years won't kill anyone, will it?" The next morning, Kwon posted the video to his personal page. He didn't write much, just a short paragraph. "This is the full story of what happened before my mother sat outside the apartment gate crying. I am not denying my responsibility as a son, but filial piety does not mean dragging my wife and children into the abyss." Quote. The video spread even faster than Two Van's live stream. The people who were cursing Kwon yesterday fell silent, then new comments began to appear. "So creditors really showed up?" "Cutting just the part where the mother cries to frame her son. That's truly outrageous. The line about renting a house for a few years not killing anyone gives me chills. The son did the right thing. You can't just take your wife and kids' house to pay off relatives' debts." By noon, Two Van locked her profile and the livestream vanished, but it was too late. People had already saved it, compared it, and realized she had intentionally staged a scene to smear us. As for Mrs. Lean, for the first time in her life, she felt public opinion turning against her. The tears she used to pressure her son ultimately became what made people see the calculations behind them. And I knew that after this counterattack, she wouldn't give up easily. A person like Mrs. Lean, once she loses face in public, will definitely find a way to drag others down into the mud with her. I thought that after Kwon's video was posted, Mrs. Lean would at least stay quiet for a few days. Someone who had just been exposed before their relatives, the apartment residents, and social media should have felt ashamed enough to stop. But for someone like Mrs. Lean, once all the masks have fallen off, what remains isn't remorse, but panic and recklessness. That afternoon, Kwon received a call from Uncle Din. The moment his name lit up the screen, my heart sank. Kwon looked at me, then answered the phone and put it on speaker. Uncle Din's voice sounded raspy, devoid of the arrogance from yesterday morning. "Kwon, where is your mother?" Kwon frowned. "Why are you asking me? Aren't you all staying together?" Quote. On the other end, there was the sound of crying and items crashing around. Uncle Din shouted, almost screaming. "She's gone. She was at the motel this morning. We went out for lunch, and when we got back, the room was empty. Her bag, documents, and all the cash are gone. She isn't picking up calls. Try calling her and see if she answers." Quote. I stood by the dining table, my hands turning cold. Kwon immediately called Mrs. Lean's number. The phone rang for a long time, but no one answered. On the second attempt, the phone was turned off. Uncle Din screamed on the other end, "She ran off with the money. Kwon, we've really been scammed by her." Quote. Aunt Wa could be heard sobbing in the background. My gold sale money, the money from the mortgage. She said to pool it together to negotiate with the bank. Quan stood frozen in place. He asked very slowly, "What money? What money is my mother holding?" Uncle Din was silent for a few seconds, then his voice dropped. "Before the house was sealed, your mother managed to gather a sum. She sold gold, withdrew savings, and told everyone to give her cash to hold. She said to pool it into a lump sum to negotiate and save the house first. It was nearly 900 million, not a small amount." Quote, I looked at Quan. His face was deathly pale. Nearly 900 million. Yet last night, Mrs. Lean cried, saying she was penniless, with nowhere to go and no way to survive. Yet this morning, she knelt in the apartment lobby, begging her son to save her. It turns out she was holding a large sum of money all along, but instead of using it to pay off debts or save those who trusted her, she secretly kept it for herself. Quan slumped into a chair, the phone still pressed to his ear. "Are you sure, Uncle?" Uncle Din let out a bitter, weeping laugh. "Why would we lie to you now? The creditors are at the motel banging on the door as we speak. Quote, they said if there's no money, they won't leave us alone. Van is crying until she's about to faint. Your aunt can't even stand anymore either. You need to find your mother. Quan, she is your mother after all." That last sentence sounded so bitter. When money was needed, Ms. Lean was the one leading the whole family. When things fell apart, she was Quan's mother. When she ran away, everyone turned to make Quan go find her. Quan hung up. He sat still for a long time, his hands clasped so tightly his veins stood out. I called out softly, "Brother," but he didn't answer. His eyes looked down at the table, bloodshot but shedding no tears. Some pain makes a person unable to cry, just feeling hollow inside. A moment later, Quan's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Hai, the friend who helped him pull the security footage that morning. Hai sent a video clip with the text. I asked an acquaintance at the bus station to check. "Take a look." Quan opened the video, the screen showing the crowded bus station scene. Ms. Lean appeared in the right corner, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, a mask, pulling a brown suitcase. She walked very fast, her demeanor nothing like the weak mother who just cried about having nowhere to turn. But what gave me goosebumps was the person walking next to her. It was a middle-aged man in a black jacket, tall and thin, with slicked back hair. He kept looking back to observe his surroundings, then helped Ms. Lean with her large bag. The two didn't look like people who met by chance. They walked closely, talking rapidly, then boarded a long-distance bus together. Quan zoomed in on the image, his lips pressed tightly. "Is it him?" I asked softly. "Who is it?" He stared at the screen, his voice thick. "The leader of the multi-level marketing group, the person his mother once praised as a decent businessman, helping folks back home get rich." I felt a cold shiver down my spine, so Ms. Lean was not alone after all. She didn't just run away because she panicked. She left with the very person who set the trap that drove their relatives into debt. Quan rewound the video, looking at the man's face over and over, then he suddenly laughed, a very soft, very painful laugh. For years, I thought Mom just cared about appearances, that she was lured and tricked by others. I never expected she was working with them. I didn't know what to say, so I just placed my hand on his shoulder. He is a man who once tried to keep a path open for his mother, saying that even if she was wrong, we had to ensure she wasn't wrongly accused. Now, he has to see proof that his mother didn't just deceive her children, but might have colluded with a person who scammed our entire family. Quan bowed his head, burying his face in his hands. If Mom took commissions, if she knew that scheme was a scam and still urged people to invest, then none of this was an accident. Han, my heart grows heavy listening to you speak. The image of Ms. Lean pops into my head, thumping her chest and saying, "Everything I do is for our relatives, for the sake of our bonds." Turns out, behind those moral words could be commission percentages, downline bonuses, and greed wrapped in a facade of affection. Just as the room fell into silence, Quan's phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. Quan opened it. I stood nearby and saw the words appear on the screen. "If you want to see your mother again in one piece, prepare 500 million. I gasped for air. Quan looked up at me, and there was no longer just pain in his eyes. This time, It was the coldness of someone who realizes the real storm hasn't even ended yet. That message sat still on the screen, yet it felt as if the entire room had been dragged into a freezing abyss. I stared at the number 500 million, and my ears began to ring. This was no longer just about a mother-in-law bringing relatives to stay, nor was it just a matter of ordinary debt. Some invisible hand had reached straight into our home, grabbing onto Kwan's greatest pain to force him to his knees. I thought Kwan would panic. After all, the person mentioned in the message is his own mother. No matter how wrong she is, hearing the phrase, "not in one piece," would make any child tremble. But Kwan didn't cry out, didn't call back immediately, and didn't rush to open his banking app like before. He simply picked up his phone, took a screenshot of the message, saved the unknown number, and turned on call recording. His movements were slow and steady, so cold that it broke my heart to watch. The man before me wasn't fearless. He was so terrified he had to force himself to stay calm, because one wrong step could drag our whole little family into a pit someone else had dug. Less than 5 minutes later, that strange number called. Kwan looked at me, put a finger to his lips to signal silence, then answered. He put it on speaker. A raspy man's voice rang out, both gruff and deliberately drawling every word. "Is this Min Kwan? Your mother is in my hands, so be smart and get 500 million ready. Don't call the police if you don't want anything to happen to her." I felt a chill run down my spine. In the bedroom, baby Sal was still fast asleep, completely unaware that out here, its parents were facing another storm. Kwan didn't rush to answer. He stared at the phone screen as if looking straight into the face of the person speaking to him. "If you want money, let me hear my mother's voice first." The other end was silent for a few seconds, then there was a rustling sound as someone handed the phone over, followed by Ms. Lean's voice, choked and trembling. "Kwan, save me. I was wrong, please save me. I'm so scared." I stood next to Kwan, listening to each of her sobs, but strangely enough, the more I listened, the more I felt something was wrong. That crying didn't sound like someone truly under threat. It sounded just like the way she cried every time she wanted to force Kwan to send money. It was the same familiar pacing, the same perfectly timed sobs, the same, "I was wrong," spoken too quickly, too clearly. Kwan realized it too. He closed his eyes for a second then asked bluntly, "Are you really being held, or are you staging another scene with these people to force me to give you money?" The other end went dead silent. That silence was more terrifying than any sobbing. If Ms. Lean were truly being held against her will, she should have been screaming, begging for help, acting terrified. But she was as silent as someone whose secret had just been exposed. Immediately after, the man's voice returned, spat out an obscenity, and growled, "You like to test me, don't you? Fine, I'll give you until tomorrow night. If you don't have the money, don't blame me." He hung up. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my chest. Kwan still held the phone, the screen now dark. After a long moment, he exhaled, very softly, "This isn't good." I asked quietly, "What should we do?" Kwan looked up at me, his eyes filled with pain and anger, but no longer the hesitation of someone being cornered. He said he wouldn't transfer a single cent, then he called Ton, an old friend of his who used to work in economic investigation. The call was brief but every word was clear. Kwan recounted the messages, the calls, how Mrs. Lean appeared on the parking garage camera with the MLM leader, and the story of Uncle Tu's high-interest loan, the house seizure, and the defamatory livestream. After listening, Ton immediately said, "This is no longer just a family matter. Keep everything as is, don't delete any messages or call logs. From now on, if they call back, stall for time and demand to hear Mrs. Lean's voice, but do not threaten or provoke them. I will guide you on how to work with the police through the proper procedures." Kwan replied, "I understand. I need to protect my wife and children first." Ton added, "Gather all the evidence. Transfer statements, your mother's messages, apartment lobby footage, the livestream video, Mr. Din's loan papers if any, and the parking garage footage. The more complete, the better. If this is a fraud ring, they aren't just targeting your family." Hanging up, Kwan turned to me, "Han, help me gather everything. We're going to get to the bottom of this once and for all." I nodded immediately. The two of us got to work almost instantly. I opened my laptop to create a separate folder, named after the date the events unfolded. Quan sent me all the screenshots of the bank statements, Mrs. Lean's messages, two Van's messages, the apartment lobby video, the downloaded livestream, and the recording of the recent extortion call. I've worked as an accountant for years, used to organizing documents, so I quickly categorized everything chronologically. Every sum of money Quan had transferred to Mrs. Lean. I clearly noted the date, the amount, what she claimed it was for, and the actual recipient. For each video clip, I recorded the exact time it appeared. When someone said something important, I didn't let my emotions cloud the facts. The more dangerous it got, the more I understood that evidence must be clear, precise, and complete. Quan stood beside me, silently watching as each file was saved. Perhaps in every piece of evidence, he didn't just see his mother's guilt, but also his own trust being torn away. By nearly 1 a.m., everything was mostly done. The apartment was suffocatingly quiet. Little Sal was in the bedroom, murmuring for her mother in her sleep. I tucked her in and went back out to see Quan still sitting at the dining table, his face in his hands. I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. Quan looked up, his eyes red but his voice steady. This time, he wouldn't save his mother with money. He held my hand and squeezed it. He would save our family with the truth. The next morning, following Mr. Tan's advice, Quan went to the police station to report the entire incident. He brought the USB drive containing all the evidence we had organized the night before. I didn't go with him because I had to take little Sal to stay with my mother. But before leaving the house, Quan hugged our child for a long time. Still sleepy, little Sal nuzzled into her father's shoulder and asked innocently, "Where are you going, Daddy?" Quan rubbed her back, his voice hoarse. "Daddy has to handle something very important, be a good girl with Grandma." Watching that scene, my heart tightened. Over the last few days, everything happened too fast and too intensely. From a midnight phone call, our small home was suddenly dragged into debt, scams, creditors, and even blackmail messages. I used to think things like this only happened in movies. I never expected it to knock on our door, driven by the hands of a loved one. By afternoon, Quan called. His voice was calmer than I expected. Quote, "They've asked me to bring the money to an abandoned parking lot in the suburbs tonight. The police will assist, don't worry." I gripped the phone tightly. "I'm coming with you." "No, it's too dangerous. I won't show myself to them, but I need to be close to you. If I stay home waiting for news, I won't be able to bear it." There was a silence on the other end for a few seconds, and finally Quan sighed. "I will double-check with the police." That evening I was allowed to sit in a civilian car parked over 100 meters from the lot with a female officer named Mai. Mai was in her 30s, her hair tied back neatly, her gaze calm. She handed me a bottle of water and spoke in a low voice. Quote, "Just sit still in the car. No matter what you see, do not run out. Your husband has already been briefed." I nodded, but my hands were still ice cold. Outside, the abandoned parking lot lay deep behind a rough, rocky dirt road. The sky was pitch black, with only a few flickering, broken high-pressure lights. Old cars were scattered about like distorted shadows. The wind blew through the roadside weeds, creating a chilling, rustling sound. Quan stepped out of another car, wearing a dark jacket, carrying a black duffel bag that contained not real money, but stacks of paper prepared to mimic the weight and shape of cash. Through the small surveillance monitor in the car, I saw his face was tense, but his steps remained steady. A 7-seater parked in the corner of the lot suddenly turned on its headlights. The beam of white light shone straight at Quan, making me jump. From behind the car, a man stepped out. It was the person from the security footage, the MLM group leader that Quan called Lamb the Wolf. He was tall and thin, his face gaunt, but his eyes were very sharp. A cigarette hung from his mouth as he walked forward, sneering. Quote, "A dutiful son shouldn't talk so much. Where's the money?" Quan lifted the bag but didn't hand it over immediately. "Where is my mother?" Lamb the Wolf took a drag of his cigarette and blew smoke in Quan's face. "So impatient. Your mother is still fine, though how long she stays fine depends on the bag in your hand." I sat in the car, my heart pounding as if it were about to burst. Mai beside me remained calm, monitoring the radio. She whispered, "Not enough evidence yet. We have to let them reveal more." The back door of the 7-seater opened, and Mrs. Lean stepped out. I went numb. She was not tied up, not gagged, there were no wounds on her face, her clothes were still neat, her hair only slightly messy, and she was still holding her familiar handbag. If you said she was just taken into custody, no one would believe it. Watching through the screen, I got goosebumps. Kwan stood still for a few seconds, then let out a faint laugh, but that smile was more painful than crying. Mom, your acting is terrible. Mrs. Lean froze, her fake panic vanishing with chilling speed. She brushed off her sleeve, her gaze turning cold and sharp. If you had just given me the money from the start, would I have needed to go this far? Hearing that, my throat tightened. So it was true, from the threatening messages to the tearful phone calls. It was all just a trap set up by Kwan's own mother to extort money from her son. Kwan gripped the bag strap tightly, his voice trembling. You even risked your own life to deceive your son. Mrs. Lean looked at him without a hint of remorse. I gave birth to you and raised you. What is 500 million to you? Your house is still there, your wife still makes money, while I have lost everything. Wolf Lamb sneered and chimed in. This old lady owes me, but she said her son had an apartment and a wife who's an accountant, so we could definitely squeeze some money out. I was just helping her play her part well. Kwan looked at his mother, his eyes bloodshot. Have you ever even considered me your son? Or am I just a wallet for you to reach into whenever you need? Mrs. Lean shrieked, don't lecture me on morality, without me, you wouldn't even be here today. At that very moment, figures rushed out from all directions in the parking lot, followed by a firm shout. Police here, nobody move. Wolf Lamb startled and turned to run, but was restrained before he could take a step. 2 henchmen hiding in the car were dragged out as well. Mrs. Lean stood frozen in the headlights, her face deathly pale. As for Kwan, he remained standing in place, the bag dropping to his feet. He didn't look at Wolf Lamb or the approaching police, he only looked at his mother with a shattered gaze. I sat in the car, tears streaming down, unable to hold them back, because I knew that the ones arrested that night weren't just a group of scammers. What was also exposed was the last shred of faith Kwan had tried to keep for his mother. That night, Ms. Lean, Lam Soy, and the others involved were taken to the station for questioning. I didn't intend to go, but Kwan held my hand tightly and whispered, "Could you come with me? I'm afraid that if I'm alone, I won't be able to stand it." That single sentence was enough for me to understand. As calm as he looked on the outside, he was completely shattered on the inside. The interrogation room was brightly lit. The smell of paperwork, cold tea, and lingering cigarette smoke made the air heavy. Ms. Lean sat opposite the investigator, her face pale, but her eyes remained defiant. Beside her was Lam Soy, his hands handcuffed. His mouth was still curled into a careless smirk, as if he believed he could still find a way out. When the officer asked about staging the extortion plot, Ms. Lean immediately burst into tears. Not the kind of weeping born of regret, but the same familiar tears she had used to manipulate Kwan for years. I'm just a victim too, officer. I'm old, I don't know anything. He lured me, he said that was the only way to get my money back. I was so panicked that I just went along with it. I never wanted to hurt my own son. I stood behind Kwan, listening to every word, feeling my heart grow cold. Even at this point, she still chose to play the most pitiful person. She could deceive her relatives, her son, and even herself, as long as she escaped responsibility. The investigator placed a stack of papers on the table. You say you are a victim. Then how do you explain the commission payments transferred to your account over the last 6 months, totaling nearly 900 million Vietnamese dongs? This isn't lost investment money, but bonuses from your downline. Ms. Lean froze, her lips trembled, and her eyes darted back and forth. That is the telltale sign of someone searching for a new lie. That is money people ask me to hold for them. I'm old, I don't know how to use the bank. They said to transfer it to my account for convenience. I don't know anything about it. Lam Soy, sitting next to her, gave a mocking laugh. You sure talk big, sister. You were quick enough to take the money, but now you claim you don't know. Ms. Lean snapped at him, shut up. You were the one who enticed me. The investigator tapped the table, demanding she stay on topic. Mrs. Lean gasped for air, then suddenly spun around and pointed straight at me. Her eyes no longer held even a trace of the pitiable mother act. They were bloodshot, venomous, and filled with resentment. It's all Han's fault. From the day she entered my house, my son changed completely. She egged Kwon on to abandon his mother, to stop giving money, and to stop helping our relatives. If she hadn't forced my son to turn his back on me, I wouldn't have been driven to this. I stood frozen. I knew she didn't like me. I knew she used to badmouth me to our relatives. But I never expected that when cornered by evidence, the first person she'd use as a scapegoat would still be me. Kwon immediately stepped forward, shielding me. His shoulders were broad, but I knew his back was trembling. "Mother, stop bothering my wife." Mrs. Lean shrieked. "You're still defending her? Even now, you're still defending her. Since the day you married her, you haven't been my son anymore. She stole my son. She made you treat your mother like a stranger." Kwon looked at her for a long time. His eyes held profound pain, but his voice was strangely calm. "No one stole me from you, Mother. You pushed me away yourself with your own greed." The whole room went silent. Even Mrs. Lean was speechless for a few seconds. That statement wasn't loud or harsh, but it was like a knife cutting into the deepest part of a mother-son relationship that had long since rotted away. The investigator played another audio file. A conversation between Mrs. Lean and Tu Van before the live stream at the apartment gate. Tu Van's voice spoke first. "Just sit down and cry. Make sure to get a close-up of your face. Netizens will see an old mother being kicked out and will immediately go after Kwon." Then came Mrs. Lean's voice, chillingly cold. "I have to make her lose face. She's very prideful. If she's insulted enough, she'll have to pay up." I looked at Kwon. His face was deathly pale. Next, the officer played footage from the bus station security camera. Mrs. Lean appeared clearly on screen, dragging a suitcase alongside Lam Soy, with no signs of being forced. She even handed him a large handbag proactively before boarding the vehicle with him. Fourth Uncle Din and Aunt Hwa had also been summoned for questioning. Fourth Uncle no longer dared to be aggressive. He testified that Mrs. Lean was the one who personally guaranteed the relatives that the investment was a sure win. "If I lose the money, I'll take the blame," Mrs. Hwa sobbed, saying that because she trusted Mrs. Lean as family and saw that Mrs. Ko had received interest several times, she mortgaged her red book. Fearing involvement, Tu Van handed over all the messages from the family group, including clear instructions from Mrs. Lean to keep pooling money in. Her upline said there's a big bonus this month. Anyone who doesn't join now shouldn't regret it later. And the line that chilled me to the bone: "If it collapses, just go to Kwon's place. He wouldn't dare abandon his mother." The evidence fell like heavy stones. Mrs. Lean could no longer cry. She sat there, her face ashen. Her hands gripped the edge of the chair tightly, and finally, she collapsed, not out of repentance. I clearly saw it was the collapse of someone who knew there was no way out. She crawled toward Kwon, reaching out to grab his pant leg. "Kwon, please, beg them for me. Tell them I'm old and just confused. Don't let them arrest me. I am your mother, after all." Kwon closed his eyes. He looked as if all his strength had been drained away. A long while later, he opened his eyes, his voice hoarse. "For the first time in my life, I cannot save you anymore." Mrs. Lean looked up sharply, her eyes full of panic. "Are you really abandoning your mother?" Kwon didn't answer immediately. He just held my hand as if to keep himself from falling. "I am not abandoning you. I just can't keep paying the price for you anymore." Hearing that, I knew that at that moment, Kwon had personally cut the toxic cord that had bound him for so many years. A cord called kinship that had actually been strangled by greed and manipulation. When the final pieces of evidence were placed on the table, the office fell silent. No one was arguing anymore. The air was so heavy that I felt as if even a slight breath could be clearly heard. Mrs. Lean slumped in her chair, her hair disheveled, her face ashen. But what haunted me most wasn't her pathetic state, but the gazes of the relatives around her. Just yesterday morning, they were standing behind her to pressure my husband and me. They even called Kwon unfilial, cursed me for being a calculating daughter-in-law, and used the two children as shields to force us to open the door. Yet, overnight, once they learned Mrs. Lean was the one who took the commission, the one who gave the guarantees, and the one who quietly collected the money and ran, all that praise turned into fury. Uncle Tu Din was the first one who couldn't hold back. He lunged toward the table, his eyes bloodshot, his trembling finger pointing straight at Mrs. Lean's face. "You said the investment was a sure thing. You said family had to trust each other. Now my house is gone. The deed is held by the bank. What are you going to do?" Mrs. Lean looked up, her lips trembling. "I lost money too. It's not like I'm happy. I was tricked by Lamb too." Uncle Tu sneered, his laughter sounding like he was choking. "What did you lose? You took nearly 900 million in commissions, and you still dare to say you lost something? My house is sealed off. My children have no place to sleep. My wife is fainting from crying, while you were packing your suitcase to leave with him. Do you take this whole family for fools to be led around by the nose?" Mrs. Wah sat in the corner of the room, her face buried in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. She no longer had that sour look she had in the apartment lobby. Before me then was just a middle-aged woman backed into a corner. Angry, humiliated, and terrified. She kept muttering one thing: "Where will the two little ones go now? The house is gone, the money is gone. How can I ever face my children again?" I looked over at the two children sitting huddled in the hallway with a female officer. They were still small, their eyes puffy from crying, their hands tightly gripping each other. They didn't understand all the adult drama, only knowing that since yesterday they've been dragged to the city, only to witness arguments and debt collectors. The police, my heart tightened. Just then, Tu Van stepped in front of Quan. She no longer had the arrogant look of the person holding the phone to livestream yesterday. Her eyes were red, her hair disheveled, her voice trembling. "Quan, I beg you. Tell everyone to take down the videos for me. Netizens are attacking me so hard I can't even lift my head. They even found where I work and are messaging my friends. I know I was wrong, but I was just following instructions." Quan stared at her for a long time. His eyes were no longer burning with anger as before, but cold and weary. "When you filmed my mother crying to smear my wife and me, did you ever think of a way out?" Tu Van bowed her head, unable to speak. Quan continued, "Did you think about little Sal? Did you think about my wife? You let hundreds of strangers curse a woman who did nothing wrong, just because you wanted to force me to open the door and force me to give you money. Now that you're being cursed back, does it finally hurt?" Tu Van burst into tears, her shoulders trembling, but this time no one stepped forward to comfort her. Some tears come too late and no longer have the power to soften anyone's heart. I gently tugged at Quan's arm, and he turned to look at me, his expression still tense. I took a breath and spoke quietly, but loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "The two children are not at fault. If needed, my husband and I can provide temporary support for their school fees and housing for the next few weeks, but I want to make it clear that this is for the children, not to pay off the adults' debts." Uncle Tu and Aunt Wall looked up at me, their eyes showing surprise and then shame. Perhaps they didn't think the daughter-in-law they called narrow-minded would be the first to mention the two children. Quan was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. He agreed. "The children are not at fault, but the funds will be transferred directly to the school or their temporary housing, not given as cash to anyone." I knew he said that to block any remaining ways for them to take advantage of us. After so many things, kindness must have its boundaries. It's not because we are bitter, but because kindness without limits will only become an excuse for others to walk all over us. The investigator asked Quan if he wanted to bail out or support Mrs. Lean financially. He stood still for a long time, and I saw his hands tremble slightly, but his voice was clear when he finally spoke. "I will hire a lawyer to ensure my mother is treated according to the law, not falsely accused, and not coerced, but I will not use money or connections to intervene. My mother must answer for her actions to the extent of her wrongdoing." Hearing this, Mrs. Lean looked as if someone had slapped her directly in the face. She stood up, pointed a finger at me, and rasped, "Are you satisfied now? You've ruined my family. Ever since you stepped into this house, my son has turned out like this." I looked at her. For the first time, I felt no fear, no anger, and no need to explain. I only saw a woman who had gone too far in her greed, yet refused to look at the hands that had brought everything down. I said slowly, "No one ruined your family, Mother. The one who ruined it is the one who put greed above their own children. The one who ruined it is the one who knew better but dragged everyone down anyway. Don't blame me anymore. I didn't sign any loan papers, I didn't trick anyone into investing, and I didn't force you to stage a scheme to extort your own son." Mrs. Lean stood frozen, her mouth opening, but she couldn't find a word to say. Then she burst into tears. This time, her weeping wasn't loud, and it wasn't meant to draw attention. It was quiet, choked and broken. Yet, this time, no one ran to comfort her. Uncle Tu turned his face away. Aunt Wa clutched her chest, sobbing silently. Tu Van lowered her head to avoid her gaze. Those who once stood behind her to pressure Quan now looked at her with weariness and resentment. Quan held my hand. His palm was ice cold. "Let's go home, honey." I nodded. We both walked out to the hallway. Little Sal was sitting on the bench. Seeing us, she ran over and hugged Quan's legs. He bent down to pick her up, holding her tightly as if afraid that letting go would pull her into the adults' dirty whirlpool. Behind us, Mrs. Lean called her son's name, at first a choked plea, then trailing off into sobs. Quan, don't leave your mother." Quan paused for a brief moment. I could feel his whole body tense up. But then he just held Sal closer, took my hand with his other, and kept walking toward the door. This time, he didn't look back. A few months later, the case in the countryside was gradually clarified. Lam Soy and the group behind the multi-level marketing scheme were arrested for defrauding many families. Not just theirs, but my husband's family as well. Flashy investment packages, seminars full of get-rich-quick talk, and promises of dream-like returns. In the end, it only left behind mortgage deeds, sealed homes, and people empty-handed, looking at each other in regret. Ms. Lean was also investigated for her role as a broker, receiving commissions and concealing cash flows. I am not sure to what extent she will ultimately be held responsible, as that is a matter for the law. But I know that since that day, Quan has become much more withdrawn. He no longer mentions his mother in an angry tone, nor does he cry. He just keeps more silent, especially late at night when little Sal is asleep and the house only echoes with a steady ticking of the wall clock. There was a time I saw him sitting alone on the balcony, with a glass of cold tea in front of him. I stepped out to drape a jacket over his shoulders. Quan didn't turn back, just softly said, "I am still Mom's son, but I cannot let her hurt my wife and child ever again." I heard those words and felt a lump in my throat. I would never force him to hate his mother. Even though Ms. Lean did so many wrong things, she is still the one who gave birth to him and raised him. There are blood ties that cannot be cut away just like that. But I also understand that family bonds should not be an excuse for a person to be hurt forever. Quan still sends her essential items through his lawyer: medicine, clothes, and a small living allowance as permitted, things she truly needs. But he does not meet her in person, nor does he let her contact me or little Sal. It is not because he is cruel, but because he understands. There are wounds that, if not yet healed, should not be touched again by the person who caused them. After that incident, our apartment gradually returned to peace. Quan changed all the door codes and re-registered the list of approved visitors with building management. He told me that from now on, anyone wanting to visit, even relatives from both sides, must notify us in advance and have both our consents. I don't find that cold at all. On the contrary, for the first time, I feel this house is truly ours. The two of us also set up a private family fund. Which part is for living expenses, which for the children, which to pay the bank, and which to help relatives only when absolutely necessary. Everything is clearly laid out. Helping anyone is fine, but there must be a reason, a limit, and it must not harm the life of our own little family. After everything that has happened, I realize more than ever that if money isn't transparent, family ties easily turn into a debt. It took a long time for Sal to stop being afraid. On nights when the neighbor's doorbell rang, she would startle and run to hug me. I had to hold her, pat her back for a long time, and tell her that our home is safe now, and no one can barge in anymore. Children don't understand adult affairs, but they can clearly sense the insecurity within their own home. One evening while we were all sitting on the living room floor doing a puzzle, Sal suddenly looked up and asked, "Dad, does Grandma still love me?" That question made both Quan and me freeze. The puzzle piece in his hand dropped onto the rug. He looked at her for a long time, his eyes filled with love and pain, then he pulled Sal into his arms and held her tightly. "Grandma loves you the only way she knows how, dear, but Mom and Dad will love you in a way that won't ever hurt you." I turned away, letting my tears fall freely. That answer was not accusatory, not bitter, and didn't sugarcoat the situation. It was just as gentle as a promise. A promise that from now on, she would grow up in a home with boundaries, protection, and love untainted by obligation. After all, I no longer think that a family must always keep its doors open unconditionally. Family is indeed a place to rely on each other in hard times, but it is not a place where anyone, in the name of blood relations, has the right to trample on others' peace. The door can be opened out of kinship, compassion, and kindness. But if behind that door lies greed, deception, and schemes to drag my wife and child into the abyss, then closing it is also a way to protect the family. I also understand the concept of filial piety better now. Filial piety is not selling your wife and child's home to cover up your parents' mistakes. Hue isn't just about staying silent while loved ones keep making mistakes and hurting others, calling that love. Sometimes, is Hue about daring to say no? It's daring to stand at the edge and keep loved ones from stepping any further, even if it hurts oneself too. One night, my mother-in-law called to say she and 5 relatives would arrive the next morning to stay for a month. I used to think it was just a family conflict. I didn't expect a whole storm waiting behind it. But thanks to that storm, I saw clearly how much my husband had matured. He is no longer a man who only knows how to endure for the sake of peace. He has learned to stand at his door, protecting his wife and child with clarity and courage. Life ahead will certainly not be completely calm. There will still be tiring days, debts to pay, and wounds that need time to heal. But every evening, watching Quan sit with little Sao, patiently teaching our child to piece together the puzzle, my heart softens. Perhaps peace is not the absence of storms. Peace is, after everything, the family still holding hands, knowing what to keep and what to let go. And for me, the most precious thing is not that 3-bedroom apartment, but that behind those doors, my husband and I have finally learned how to protect our home.